Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in just a moment or two once we give everyone a chance to join the meeting. So thanks, sit tight, and we'll be with you in just a moment. Good evening, everyone. If you're just joining us, thank you. We're going to sit tight for just another moment or so to let finish people filtering in. We'll get started in just a moment. Thanks. Okay, our attendee count is starting to slow up. We'll give it about 30 more seconds, and then we'll go over some administrative items for the meeting, how it's going to work, and then we'll kick it off in just a moment. Okay, looks like our attendee count is leveling out. So with that, we'll get started. Good evening. My name is Alan Belniak from VHB. I'm helping facilitate the digital portion of the meeting. Just a few administrative items before we kick off the meeting in earnest. We have a handful of sections of the meeting, which you'll see in a moment on the agenda slide. We're actually going to pause halfway through or so to take a moment and look for comments and questions at that point. And then once again at the end of the presentation for comments and questions on both the second half as well as the entire presentation overall. There are two ways you can let us know that you'd like to share a comment or a question. The first is if you're joining us through Zoom, I don't see any telephone attendees at the moment, is down below in your tray of Zoom controls. If you don't see those, if you move your mouse down there, they'll appear. You should see a Q&A box, and that is quite simply question and answer. Type in your question, it'll pop into our queue in the order that they're sent. And when the time is right, we'll read them aloud, and a member of the team will either respond to the comment or question. You can also choose to raise your hand if you'd like to share your comment or question verbally. Also in that bottom tray of Zoom controls, there's a little raise hand icon. Looks like someone's giving you a high five. If you click on that, that signifies to us that you'd like to raise your hand as well. And then what we'll do is we'll call on you at the appropriate time. I'll send a command to unmute your line. You then have an opportunity to again either ask your question or share your question or share your comment, and a member of the team will address it accordingly. We do have a member dialing in, so for those dialing in, if you like to raise your hand, the command is *9. Again, there's two opportunities to ask questions and comments, once about halfway through, and then once at the end. This meeting is being recorded for archival purposes, just to let you all know. I'll remind you that once more too when we get to the questions and comments section. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to the mayor for some opening remarks. Mayor Hilling?
Thank you, Alan. And everybody, welcome to this discussion regarding the adaptive reuse of the South Norwalk Train Station as a multimodal transportation hub. This study is important to our city in so many ways as we look to increase transportation options for our residents, as well as continue the important redevelopment efforts in South Norwalk. As with any major project involving a lot of stakeholders, public participation is a vital component in this process, and I encourage all residents and stakeholders to offer their views and opinions so that this exciting project can move forward in a truly meaningful way that will best serve our community for many, many years. Tonight's conversation will help us craft a plan for the area that is inclusive and that will also address parking and infrastructure needs by leveraging grant and funding opportunities and viable private-public partnerships. The study includes a focused look at how to increase transportation options for Norwalk residents, including options for biking, better vehicular traffic patterns, more public transportation availability, more sidewalks to facilitate foot traffic, and additional parking in the area. Norwalk continues to grow at a faster rate than the rest of the state, including Fairfield County. This study will go a long way to ensuring that our growth happens in an equitable way with meaningful, affordable housing and employment opportunities for residents in need. Again, thank you for attending. And Alan, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, Thank you for the opening remarks. I think the next person up would be Brian to walk us through the contents of the presentation.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alan, and welcome everybody. I'm really happy to see you all, and thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us for tonight's discussion. As some of you may have participated in, this is the second meeting regarding the South Norwalk Train Station area plan. At our first meeting, we went over a lot of interesting concepts, obtained a lot of very valuable feedback from you all. And what we've been working on since our last meeting is to really assess some of those topic areas and provide more technical information for you all tonight to react to. And we could have a larger community discussion around these topics and then the new information that you'll be presented. If you'll recall, some of the things that we talked about, at the last meeting, for those of you that were here, there's a lot of competing interests and a lot of competing needs around the relatively small geography of our study area and the train station. So what this plan is ultimately trying to do is to find and achieve balance among them. So you'll be exposed to a lot of different constraints, a lot of new information tonight that's going to kind of reflect that and how we've been working over the past 12 months here with the local community, people that live directly around the train station, so that we could help inform the discussion we're going to have today about the local and regional significance of the overall train station and what we can do there and what is feasible from a technical perspective, but also financial. So tonight we're going to, our basic agenda here is just going to provide you a little bit of a catch up, do a project overview of where we're at and how we got here. Describe some of the community input and the really advanced level of information gathering we've conducted over the past few months. Take a look at the market analysis that we've performed, so you could all get some sort of context in terms of what's happening from an economic perspective in the market and how that's influencing life in Norwalk and then the future of Norwalk as well. Some of you may recall the discussion around the actual location of the transitway. How do we improve the connections to the train station from other parts of Norwalk? We've taken a really deep look at that, and we'll provide you that information tonight. And then also propose some development concepts that we had worked out with the local residents in the immediate train station area, and then how that affects the infrastructure and transportation mobility options that we all need to have that are functioning well and to serve this important local and regional asset. So with that, we're joined by VHB, our product consultants, and they're going to be walking us through much of tonight's content. And we'll have sort of logical break points for you all to ask questions and get caught up, and then a larger community conversation at the end. So again, thank you all for coming tonight. We're really looking forward to the discussion. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Ken Schwartz from VHB.
Thank you, Brian, and good evening, everyone. My name's Ken Schwartz. I'm Senior Vice President and Director of Planning at VHB. And I'm going to spend about 10 minutes just kind of giving you an overview of the project. Some of you may have attended the first community meeting. For others that have not, just give you a brief overview of the project and then highlight the really valuable input that we received from the community at a number of stages along the process of developing this plan. So just in terms of an overall project overview, this kind of highlights there are about 6 or 7 sort of major areas that the plan touches on. As the mayor mentioned, transportation infrastructure. We're looking at the station itself, the bus connections to the station, the whole pedestrian circulation and bike circulation, and how we integrate the kind of transportation infrastructure around the station itself. We're looking at land use and development of public property, particularly on the west side of the station. There's large land holdings that are under public ownership. A very important component of our project is affordable housing. We're going to be looking at complete streets. And when we talk about complete streets, we mean streets that are not designed solely for the automobile, but also for bikes and pedestrians and transit as well as roadway enhancements. Neighborhood connectivity and neighborhood preservation. This is something that very clearly was identified in the conversations with the community as something that's vitally important. Community cohesion and balance, and then opportunities to enhance green space and provide more open space and parks. So those are the kind of areas of the plan that we're addressing and priorities for the plan. So project goals, adaptive reuse of the train station, making it a multimodal transportation hub, improving connections, neighborhood connections within the neighborhood and from the neighborhood to the station itself, making sure that there's provisions for affordable housing built into the plan, filling in empty underutilized lots, whether they be surface parking lots or vacant parcels, preserving the historic neighborhood and historic character of the neighborhood, looking at opportunities to accommodate facade improvements to buildings in the neighborhood. And as I mentioned, identifying future build out potential, both on the east side and the west side of the station. So to orient people to, this is our study area identified. There are basically 6 areas. We refer to them as the east side of the station and the west side of the station. On the east side is basically the station itself, which includes the parking garage on the west side, the station, and the parking lots that accommodate the commuters that are using the station. Also on the east side is number 3, which is what we refer to as the Lexington Avenue area. And then on the west side are 3 areas. They include the Housing Authority property identified in number 6, the SNU property identified as number 5, and then the private development area identified on number 4 with Dr. Martin Luther King Junior Drive sort of on the western boundary of our study area. So when we looked at this area, we really see this as a really transformative opportunity for the city of Norwalk. We want to, and you can see the study area is identified in blue. But there really is to optimize the publicly controlled assets. So the blue areas are the publicly owned properties, and the yellow are the privately owned parcels within the study area. And looking to optimize, particularly the publicly controlled assets, create an integrated neighborhood. Balancing land use with community needs. This was something that was clearly identified in the conversations with the community. Looking at the adaptive reuse of the train station and infill redevelopment opportunities, improving the transit components and the infrastructure around the station itself, and then really focusing on equity, affordable housing, parking, historic preservation, sustainable development, and complete streets. So as Brian said, there's a lot that's going into this plan. It's all about trade-offs and establishing, we can't do everything, but clearly there are areas where there are opportunities for improvements to be made. And based upon the community input that we've received, we're balancing those needs with the future opportunities around the station itself. So another area that, as I highlighted, is really the historic preservation and neighborhood preservation, looking at opportunities to, we really want to protect the existing residential neighborhoods from inappropriate development, whether it be private development or public development, protecting the historic building context around the area. I mean, you can see on this graphic here, there are a number of strong neighborhood assets and historic preservation areas that we need to be mindful of, and looking to concentrate the development and particularly the higher density development within a quarter mile of the train station, within an easy walk of the train station. So people don't necessarily need to drive. They can walk from wherever they're living to the train station itself and to take transit. So as Brian and the mayor mentioned, I think one of the foundational elements of the plan is the extensive community engagement that we've had. We've been working very closely with a community advisory committee, as well as a technical advisory committee that we've presented our work and have gotten feedback on our work throughout the process. We conducted a community-wide survey, and I'll highlight that in a moment. Got some really good responses on that. And then the public meetings, like the one we're having tonight. This is our second one. So, I would just say that the plan has really benefited from having really good public input. And I would encourage people to continue to stay involved, continue to offer their comment throughout the process in developing this plan. So just to highlight a couple of the things that came up during the community conversations and the community input that we had. Back in September, we conducted a walking tour with the community of the study area around the station. And this highlights a couple of the areas that the community had mentioned during the tour. A pathway for affordable housing ownership, not just rental housing, but affordable housing ownership. And you're going to hear momentarily from Eric Halverson from RKG some of the recommendations with regard to how we can achieve that. There was a desire for community-oriented commercial uses, whether they be supermarkets, dry cleaning, daycare, things like that. A need for streetscape improvements, more tree plantings, and better sidewalk accommodations, bike lanes, things like that, additional green space. A concern about traffic impacts with the development both on the east side that's happening and potential development on the west side. You will hear momentarily from our traffic consultant, traffic expert, Joe Bauskas, on the traffic impacts, and then also on the transitway options. And we have a portion of the presentation devoted to that as well. So these were the things that came up during our community walking tour. Just some photographs of some of the areas that were identified during our tour of focus areas, the underpass at Franklin Street, needing better attention, the MLK Drive and Monroe Street intersection, bus activity at the station, Merritt Place. These were the highlights of the tour that we took with the community. There was also follow-up discussions with additional community input from District B, things like community amenities, facade improvements, tree planting programs, support for local service organizations, the YMCA and shelters, as well as preserving the quality of adjacent development, specifically the Columbus Court. And again, on the home ownership, a theme that came up was down payment assistance and opportunities to create home ownership for residents of the neighborhood. As mentioned, there was a survey that was undertaken, approximately 280 respondents to the survey. Again, you can see themes coming up from the neighborhood conversations and surveys. A strong desire for neighborhood uses like grocery stores, restaurants, recreation facilities, and a strong desire for a more pedestrian-friendly walking environment with better sidewalks and improved lighting. And then last month, we had another meeting with the Community Advisory Committee. We used that as an opportunity to have follow-up discussions from the September walking tour that was conducted. We really dug in more on the affordable housing ownership modeling, the transitway locations, the private development adjacent to the train station, updating the CAC on that. And then we reviewed as well the long-term development plan. So as you can see, there was a lot of back and forth and discussions with the community leading up to where we are tonight. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Halverson, who is from RKG Associates. They are a consultant working with VHB and undertook the market analysis and looked at the affordable housing ownership modeling. So Eric.
Great. Thanks so much, Ken. Hi, everyone. Happy to be with you tonight. So just in terms of the market, I think as Brian mentioned at the outset, Norwalk as a whole is a growing city, which is great from a market perspective. Over the last 10 years, both population and households have been increasing citywide, and as Brian mentioned, actually at a faster rate than both Fairfield County and the state as a whole. So in addition to that general growth trend, we also know from talking with developers and real estate brokers who are active here in Norwalk that the out-migration trends during COVID from the bigger cities like New York, for example, have brought additional residents to Norwalk, particularly to locations with access to trains and public transit like here. As more residents end up putting down roots in locations like South Norwalk, they also bring with them additional household spending, which goes to support our local businesses, such as restaurants, retailers, grocers, personal services, and the like. In South Norwalk, housing is a really important driver of market demand. There are a broad range of household types in Norwalk that are driving that demand, from young professionals to empty nesters, but also single-parent households to multi-generational households. The growing demand from both younger households and older householders are driving the need for more smaller-sized units too. They tend to have similar consumer preferences and the ability to pay market rents, which in turn are creating the strong housing supply trends we've been seeing in the area. Citywide, demand for housing is very strong, backed by the roughly 2,800 units that have been approved or those that are under construction since the year 2016. Next slide, please. So looking quickly at non-residential market demands, RKG reviewed statistics on the office market, both in Norwalk and Fairfield County. And even prior to COVID, office demand in Norwalk had continued to weaken. And in 2020, office vacancy was at about 29%, with a net loss of occupied space of about 400,000 square feet. But to project future demand for office, we look at employment trends countywide, and we assume a portion of that countywide employment will drive office demand in Norwalk. While Fairfield County's office occupying sectors are projected to grow, Norwalk's current office vacancies could likely accommodate much of that employment growth over time. We do, however, believe that there are some opportunities for maybe some smaller scale office users to occupy ground floor spaces in mixed use buildings in South Norwalk. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we look at retail and restaurant space demand. The linkage between people living and those who might be visiting South Norwalk and the support they provide to our local businesses is critical, particularly when you have more people living within a comfortable walking distance to, say, a downtown, a main street, or a retail center. The frequency of visitation for those households will usually outpace those that have to drive or come from some distance. In September of last year, of 2021, we conducted a field visit and a walking tour of both the Washington Street and the South Main corridors, and estimated about 20,000 square feet of vacant first floor space for retail and restaurants. These spaces range from as small as 1,000 square feet up to as much as 10,000 square feet. With the current amount of housing, both under construction or those that are in the approval pipeline citywide, we believe there's support for about 46,000 square feet of retail space. This spending power from these future residents could really help support businesses to both fill vacant spaces, maybe even expand their existing footprint for those who are active in the city today, and also support the planned new retail that's part of some of the proposed projects in and around the city. Next, please. In addition to collecting market data, RKG also worked with the team to develop a financial feasibility model for new development in the study area. So this model compares development and construction costs for a project to potential revenues from that new development to then determine if a particular development scenario makes financial sense or not. Would somebody actually build it? Using this model, our team can test different size developments, different mixes of uses, and other parameters such as housing affordability or parking requirements. The goal of this analysis was to determine if there were any financial challenges with different development scenarios. So from that, our main takeaways included projects under the current zoning, which do include 10% of affordable housing per the city's requirements. We're really on the cusp of being financially feasible. Most will work and may require maybe some assistance, particularly if construction costs continue to rise as they have been, especially over the last 2 years with COVID. When we make adjustments to things like rent levels, parking requirements, land value, that financial viability really starts to improve. We know construction costs have risen substantially in the last 2 years, which may make it a bit more challenging to adjust the other levers, such as increased housing affordability, more parking than what's required, and other on-site or off-site mitigation measures. But that being said, just because there appears to be a gap in the financial feasibility, it doesn't necessarily mean development should or will cease. There are gap financing measures and creative partnerships that can help move development projects forward that are beneficial to the neighborhood and to the city. Next. And lastly, we recognize through our discussions, as Ken mentioned, that these discussions with the community just really how important the concept of affordable housing and also affordable homeownership options are to the community. So we looked into some potential models that could be applied to this area and came away with three kind of potential options for delivery of affordable ownership units. These are sort of ordered in the way in which we think they could be implemented, basically going from short term to longer term. So the first option is similar to what the city has in place now, which is referred to as inclusionary zoning and deed restricted units, basically to affordable purchase prices. So through inclusionary zoning, the city essentially mandates through the zoning that a certain percentage of the units within a new housing development must have their sale price restricted or their rent rate restricted to an affordable price, typically set by the area median income. The city has inclusionary zoning in place that regulates both rental and ownership development, and it mandates that 10% of all the units in a development be made available to households earning 60% of the area median income. So some cities around the country that we've explored have also coupled the inclusionary zoning requirement with an affordable ownership down payment assistance program. Often one of the more challenging barriers facing low to moderate income households in purchasing a home is being able to save up enough money for that initial down payment. So this could be one way of removing a potential obstacle for those households. The second opportunity would be to look at the feasibility of establishing what's referred to as a community land trust. This would be an organization, it's typically a nonprofit or a community-based entity that would enter into a purchase agreement for the land and the building or the buildings that occupy the land. Usually this model is most effective for lower scale housing options like single family or maybe townhouses. The land itself is owned by an entity, but the units themselves are owned by individuals, which helps reduce the cost by not having to purchase the land along with the unit. When the owners of the units want to sell, the sale price is often capped. So some equity in the sale can be realized by the seller, but the new sale price is not above current affordable housing price points. And the final opportunity is one that was really popular in the 70s and 80s called housing cooperatives, particularly the idea of a limited equity housing co-op. This is a communal form of ownership, typically in larger scale buildings, most often with condominium units. The limited equity partnership can offer affordable purchase prices, essentially in return for a lower share of profits should the unit or the building itself be sold off at some point in the future. Members of the co-op own the building via shares, and payments are made for the share, essentially the unit, a maintenance fund, and a reserve fund. As shares or units are sold, they again must be sold off at an affordable price to that next household. So those are just some of the potential options that are out there. I'm sure there are more, and would look forward to hearing any feedback you might have. Ken?
So I think at this point, we're going to pause and take, devote 5 or 10 minutes for Q&A.
Excellent. So just a reminder, in case anyone joined late, there's two ways to let us know that you'd like to ask a question or share a comment. If you hover your mouse in the bottom control of Zoom, you should see two options, Q&A, where you can type your question and we'll read it aloud and address it that way. Or you can raise hand, in which case an icon will show up and we'll selectively kind of call on you to unmute your line. Again, ask your question, share your comment. Just scanning the list once more. We had a dial-in phone person, but they no longer seem to be with us, so I don't need to go over those controls. So at the moment, we do have our first hand raised. Okay, so that hand raised is Tanner Thompson. And Tanner, I've sent the command to you to unmute your mic, and when you do, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for putting this on. I'm really looking forward to these improvements around the South Norwalk Station. Just to introduce myself, I'm a Norwalk resident. I live within walking distance of the South Norwalk Station. I live, though, not in the study area, but up on Golden Hill to the northwest of the station. And at least before the pandemic, I commuted to the city via the train station and walked to the station most days. Nowadays, I don't go in as often, but I look forward to doing so more in the future. What I want to talk about, though, is this focus on affordability and affordable housing. And honestly, my comment is not directed at VHB, because I think VHB gets it. This is more directed to the elected officials in Norwalk. And that is that the existing zoning regulations, which I know are in the process of being rewritten, have a big impact on the affordability of housing in an area. In particular, when they put constraints on the supply of housing, and I know that that's being addressed here. But in addition to the things that are on this slide, which I think are valuable strategies, I think that taking out some of the regulations that are currently in zoning would also have a beneficial effect on housing affordability. In particular, 4 things that I wrote down are minimum lot size, the floor area requirement, or the floor area ratio, the setback requirements. That's something that I've been running into at my own townhome that I live in, and then parking minimums. All of these create additional constraints that a developer or a builder or a homeowner has to fit into, which ultimately drive up the price of housing. And in an urban area like South Norwalk, especially, I think all of those things need to be reevaluated and potentially done away with, so that housing affordability is just kind of happens by default. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tanner. Give me one moment to lower your hand. Okay. Next, I'll go to next raised hand, then I'll go to Q&A. The next raised hand is Diane Lauricella. So Diane, if you would like to unmute your line, you can then ask your question or share your comment.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for all those that put this session together. I am so pleased that VHB introduced the models of community land trust and housing cooperatives, because I myself am one who is in need of affordable housing. And I've noted in some cities like New Haven, Norwalk has some cooperative housing, but it's much older models. And so I'm in favor of making sure that's shopped around to our construction community as well as the not-for-profits. I wanted to add one other model that you did not mention, and that is the accessory dwelling units. Now, in the study area, I am not sure that there is, that this would be germane to it. But for those on this call, there are other places in South Norwalk and beyond, in all of the areas of Norwalk where ADUs or accessory dwelling units, and I'm sure you do a better job explaining what those are. I think there's a need for this city and its land use agencies and its officials to realize that with the proper controls or the clarity on how to develop them in the right places, they can actually have them. Because we're finding that some people have a misinformation about what an ADU is and is not. And I lastly just wanted to say to people, anyone interested in this, AARP, I'll admit I'm old enough to be a member. Anyway, they have terrific website, aarp.org, under /livable. They have a whole series of free information about ADUs. And I think the city needs to take a look. I know that the planning and zoning is currently thinking about opting out of there hopefully we'll have a public discussion about whether this city should opt out of a benefit that the legislature afforded us at the last session in 2021. So thank you again for this session. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you, Diane, for both the comments and the candor. Certainly appreciate that. Next, we're going to go to an item in the Q&A, and it's from Robert Barton. And Robert comments, it seems odd that the police headquarters property was omitted from the study. There is a large surface parking lot which could be developed in ways that benefit the community.
I can kind of speak a little bit to that, and thanks for the question. So, although we have the specific, study area, the geography, it's not self-contained in itself, right? So we are looking at adjacent properties and how any sort of recommendations that we have here could impact that. And part of that discussion has been about the police headquarters and taking exactly what you just, referred to, a look at options for that surface parking lot. Is there, opportunities to maybe perhaps structure some of that parking or provide, open some space area. So we are looking at that, obviously being very sensitive to the operations of the facility, both in terms of the sort of land uses that are on there, but also in terms of some of the circulation and transportation recommendations that we're looking at along Chestnut Street, and how the police department uses access out of their garage and their facility there. So although it's not delineated in the specific study area geography on the map, we have been working with them and discussing what sort of options could exist. Recognizing that is a large surface parking lot that may not be the highest and best land use, but it's very important and needs to be maintained for very specific operational purposes for the police.
Thank you, Robert, for the question, and thank you, Brian, for the explanation. The next I see is a hand raised is Todd Bryant. Todd, I'm going to send a command for you to unmute your mic, and when you do, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. So this is Todd Bryant. I'm the president of the Norwalk Preservation Trust, and a couple of things. I think you might want to look into the state of Connecticut's historic homeowner tax credit and the way that could be used in some of these in the study area, and for individual homeowners, and the state and federal credits for commercial development in the study area. Both of those are used very well. The homeowner credit's been used very effectively in both Hartford and New Haven by organizations, by nonprofits in those two towns. I can put you in touch with those folks. And the federal and combined state and federal credits were used at 11 Chestnut Street, and I'm not sure any place else, but it's out there, and it's a substantial amount of bridge funding.
Okay. Thank you, Todd. Let me lower your hand. Okay. Next is a text-based Q&A question from Kevin Moses. Kevin writes, has the city considered donating fallow city-owned parcels to potential developers within the condition of providing a determined threshold of affordability, thereby avoiding the land costs that commonly make affordable housing infeasible?
I can answer that, Alan. I think that's a great catch there. And yes, I think that's a big part of the study and what we're going to be discussing tonight in subsequent slides. So, as Ken mentioned, we're sitting up in front of a transformative opportunity for South Norwalk. There's a number of publicly controlled assets that could be used for just that, right? And we have an opportunity as a community to have a discussion on what is the highest and best use of that, not just from an economic perspective, but from a community and social perspective. So given the fact that the city, there are publicly controlled assets, how can that influence the financial model to make housing affordability or higher thresholds of affordable housing work? You look on the slide that's actually up here right now, from the Fairfield County Housing, affordability report, there's what you could almost perceive as an unlimited demand for affordable housing, especially in Fairfield County, given its cost. And I think, this is an opportunity to have that discussion. So we'll touch more on that in subsequent slides.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you for the comment as well. We have two more comments I'd like to read aloud, then flip back to a raised hand. First comment is adding a +1 to the comment about the police headquarters. That's prime real estate in an arguably the most walkable part of the city, right by the train station. Seems a waste to use it mostly as a parking lot. So thanks for the comment there, Tanner. The next comment that came in was from Amy Valancourt, and Amy comments, I believe that surface parking at the police station is a cap for soil contamination from the former Mallory Hat Factory. So that's Amy's comment there. Okay, we see one more hand raised and one more open question at the moment. So I'll flip over to the hand raised. That's Diane Keefe. Diane, you should have a command now to open up your mic. And when you do, you can ask your question or share your comment.
Hi, I apologize. I missed most of your presentation. So if you've already covered this, I apologize. But I do echo the endorsement of accessory housing. And I know that Norwalk zoning also puts a maximum size on accessory housing, which I think is unnecessary. If people can build a big accessory housing unit, that provides more affordable housing for more families. And I think that we need to do more to put bike paths and bike accessibility to the South Norwalk train station. That whole area is way too car dominant, and people are taking their lives in their hands when they try to ride their bicycles around there. And the last piece is that if there's going to be housing development where it's already quite dense in South Norwalk, I think it would be much better if there were high rises that were not stick built. I know most of the new build condos and rental buildings that have been built in South Norwalk have been stick built. And what we've seen with the recent fires in the Bronx and Manhattan is, just chicken feed compared to what stick built buildings do when they burn. I've seen a couple of stick built buildings burn in New York, and it wasn't pretty. So I'm very concerned about the structure of the built environment there, and that I think when you build up, you also decrease the pressure of the land cost on the total development cost for affordability. So I think it's really important to have mixed uses within one high rise or a few high rises in South Norwalk that could actually offer water views even from the South Norwalk train station neighborhood. That would add a lot of value.
Great. Thank you, Diane, for your comments. And Brian, do we have time for one more text-based question before the second half, or?
Yeah, I think we could do one more, then we'll get moving. Okay,
great. That question or comment is from Laura Garcia, and Laura writes, I live at 297 Eli Ave. I know the impact of the housing availability around that area. And I also believe that we need communication, and we really need to involve the people who live around this area, around the train area specifically. I've been helping people in that area, and I know a lot of the needs of the neighbors in the South Norwalk, specifically in the back of the train station. Laura continues to say we need more affordable housing for the working class people in that area, and she thanks us for the opportunity to comment.
Great, and I could just provide some additional insight, and I appreciate the comment, Laura. And this was, similarly heard at the first public outreach meeting that we had. And as a result of that, we really took that to heart, and we really repositioned our whole study. And we created what was referred to as the Community Advisory Committee earlier, which is a lot of representatives that live directly around the train station, recognizing that, yes, this is a huge local and regional asset, but whatever goes on here really impacts the local residents. So what we've been doing as we've been going throughout this whole process, and some of the things that you're going to see in subsequent slides, we've been working very closely with the Community Advisory Committee, which is representatives from District B, and would, obviously want to keep you informed if you want to send us your contact information as we continue this study to move that forward. But that is of critical importance to this effort, and I think it's the only real way that we could really tackle that issue of balance that I brought up at the start of the session. So I really appreciate your comment. I know we're going to move on here, but I'll just address to Diane's point regarding green building design. That is definitely of critical importance to the work we're doing as well. And some of the other work that the Redevelopment Agency and the City of Norwalk are doing in terms of sustainability and climate action planning. And we're going to make sure that, a lot of the recommendations that go into this report are going to reflect, best practices from a green design perspective, as we have again, a transformative opportunity here to kind of do things differently and do things right right around the train station. So I appreciate your comment as well. But I think with that, we have about another good portion of our presentation to go through. So we'll keep on moving here. So is it Ken or someone from your team?
Michael.
Michael, great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brian. My name is Michael Goldenberg with VHB. I'm working with Brian, Ken, and Eric and Joe on this project. We've talked a bit about how what a unique opportunity this endeavor is for South Norwalk to develop the area around the station in a responsible way, also addressing community needs. And another aspect of that is addressing transit infrastructure and improving connections. So we've explored a number of locations for the transitway, and with input derived from concepts derived from the CAC, which Brian referred to a few moments ago. And before we walk through these options, I'd just like to say, on balance, I think any improvements to transit access and ped and bike modes and the bus system and streetscape, all of those collectively really can contribute to a better South Norwalk for everyone. So here you can see the station layout and transit elements, and I'm sure you all are familiar with the station, but here's how it all works. We have the bus drop off and pick up on the east side of the station, the surface parking lot also on the east side, and within that area there's also some space for bus staging, and on the west side you can see the various garage access points, as well as customer dedicated customer parking for SNU. So this slide covers characteristics that are really focused on the integrated nature of a transit hub, minimal walking distances between connecting services. In this instance, we're really talking about bus and rail connections, really fostering a sense of connectivity, creating a connection, a physical connection between the bus and rail, and also having a facility with good wayfinding. And it's important to note this purely from a transit perspective. Here's a mix of public bus and public shuttles serving the station. We have 3 buses and 6 shuttles. Headways are generally between 20 and 40 minutes, and these shuttles are primarily focused on serving the AM and PM peak periods. Based on pre-pandemic ridership data that was provided to us by the transit district, on average, there are a little over 2,100 riders boarding and alighting at the station on weekdays. So the high numbers for bus are Wheels 11 at almost 800 passengers, and for the shuttle, the Merit 7 with 540 passengers. So as part of this assessment, we looked at what we would need for bus space. So I'll walk you through that right now. From the 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. hour, there's a need for between 5 and 6 slots. However, in the 8 a.m. hour, we need 8 slots. And this is because this is largely based on 4 shuttles, the Westport Merit 7, the NCC commuter shuttle, and the Norwalk Hospital shuttle. And these are really scheduled to meet up with trains. We have the New Haven bound 804 and 837 trains, and the New York City bound 803 and 833. So even with this need for slots, there are still really large segments within these hours, 15 and 20-minute blocks, where bays would be largely unoccupied. So we looked at this generally because we wanted to plan for the most intense period of use, so that each vehicle would have a physical slot in case of an externality like a delay or a breakdown, and also to allow for some amount of future growth should ridership warrant it. So as part of this transitway effort, we did look at several options, and we'll walk you through those right now. First, we have a potential transitway on the west side of the station. Benefits of this concept would include a seamless rail bus connection, good bus flow from MLK Drive to State Street, and the ability for operators to have access to layover facilities. One of the concerns we heard about a potential busway on the west side from the community was air quality emissions. We recognize this. This is more of a short-term issue, and again, it's important to keep in mind this whole plan is a number of years out, and bus technology is changing so quickly. So at some point in the near future, the bus fleet will be an all-electric fleet, and we won't have these issues with air quality. So really, that's a good thing. Another significant challenge with this concept is to implement the busway fully would require a relocation of this from the SNU site. So we would need SNU off that site to implement this concept. And because of that, we looked at opportunities for phased implementation, and we wanted to see what would happen as kind of an interim condition if we used the existing State Street entrance for bus use. So again, you can see that concept laid out here. You get a lot of the benefits in a little bit more limited way as the previous option, and this is something for the short term. I would mention on the east side, we would have the private shuttles and kiss and rides, taxis, and TNCs. So that would be for passenger pickup and drop off. You know, an additional drawback with this is there is some dedicated SNU parking for customers who would use the SNU office. So that's something to consider as well. Our next option on Dr. MLK Jr. Drive, it was derived directly from feedback received at our September CAC meeting and community walking tour. We wanted to see what a potential busway on MLK, what that would look like. So benefits to that is it does free up land around the station for other potential uses or additional green space or plaza space. This could be implemented without a SNU property decision, and it does maintain the current garage access. Certain challenges with this concept include a lack of seamless intermodal connections. There is a distance that passengers transferring from bus to the rail would need to walk about 500 feet. So that's not as that's a bit more distant than previous options. This would also require removal of one traffic lane of each direction on MLK. So that's another drawback to this as well. Our last option we looked at was utilizing the east side of the station, similar today for a transitway. This offers passenger familiarity with this good station access with the seamless transfer, and so those are benefits. Challenges include a lack of direct access to MLK Drive. There is a potential, depending on bus routing, where buses would use local roadways more than they do now. And the Kiss and Ride drop-off would also be located on the west side of the station. So these are the three options that we looked at. Here is a really conceptual high-level screening that looks at the three options. We looked at locational decisions, aspects of transportation, environmental, as well as the ability to implement. So the east and west side of the stations score well. On this, our recommendation in the near term is really to utilize the east side of the station for the transitway as sort of an interim measure. And then longer term, once SNU is relocated, our recommendation would be to build out the west side of the station for the transitway. And this would really offer the long-term opportunity to develop South Norwalk Station into a really integrated transit facility for the future. So quickly, here are our transit recommendations. As I mentioned, on the east side of the station, we're recommending that for a near-term implementation. The west side of the transitway in the longer term really offers long-term benefits, both operationally for better bus operations. This is really something that the transit district can also account for as they plan, should they plan for a bus network redesign and to improve their system, the ability to reduce operating costs with a dedicated facility. It also offers the ability to better time buses to optimize transfers, and layovers can also be prescribed. And I should mention, with the west side of the transitway, the east side really can be used for passenger pickup and drop off, pedestrian focused infrastructure and bike, and that side of the station really creates a connection to other areas of South Norwalk. So on the whole, that's was our look at transitway recommendations. And now Brian and Ken will walk through the development concepts.
Thanks, Michael. And yeah, I think some of the transitway discussions are very tied to some of the development concepts that we're going to be talking about tonight. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context and kind of, what we did and how we got to where we are with the development. So as we sort of stated before, there's a huge opportunity in the fact you have these publicly controlled assets on the west side of the train station. If Michael, if you don't mind just going to the next slide, just so I can have a map for reference. So, obviously for those to acclimate here, we have the Housing Authority property as well as the SNU site, which the Housing Authority is interested in modernizing their facilities and hopefully increasing some of the amount of affordable housing that is currently on that site. And the SNU site, some could argue is not really at its highest and best use, being sort of that's not really serving its intended original purpose, serving more of an administrative and a maintenance function. And could we, reimagine this site to achieve some of the goals that have been expressed tonight, even, in the comments that we're hearing today. So, interest in having additional affordable housing, interest in maybe increasing some density over there to make those numbers work, or introduce new construction types to the area. So we really looked long and hard at what could and could not be done in the area, both from just accommodating density, accommodating units, and then what impacts that would have on infrastructure. Because again, going back to the theme of balance, as you grow, you need to make sure you're growing responsibly, and responsibly, it could be in a lot of different things. It could be from an economic perspective, social perspective, but also making sure that whatever development that you're introducing into the area doesn't come at the expense of local area residents in terms of how they currently use the area. And kind of sort of as the mayor sort of brought up at the beginning of the session, you're wanting to strike a balance between welcoming new residents to Norwalk while also protecting the homes and lives of existing residents, and wanting to find that balance within these sites. So we sort of have taken a look at the market analysis that Eric previously provided, developed some base level recommendations in terms of how many units we think the market could support, and then modeled that from a transportation perspective, which you'll hear about more tonight. And we've sort of broken it up into this sort of east versus west side concept, primarily just as the nature of the ownership. So if we look at the eastern side, the side that you may all be aware of, the one platform development that actually is online and developed here on Chestnut and Monroe. Also recent approvals of being obtained for the 10 Monroe project, which is just right there on Monroe and South Main. And then taking a look at the potentiality of a project along Henry and Chestnut. So we're sort of referring to that as 1517 Chestnut. And wanting to make sure that, should these developments all come online as an overall master plan, that we're addressing the infrastructure needs so that they, reduce their overall impact. And we'll talk a little bit about that further later in the presentation from a transportation perspective. So we're sort of calling this as phase one. The things that are we know that are in the pipeline, ready for development or, currently being developed. And relating it back to the transitway discussion, saying, okay, well, in the interim, we want to improve this so that we still have those seamless connections from a transit perspective. All the commuter shuttles are accommodated in an efficient and effective manner, so that we're trying to reduce the number of vehicle trips in the area, obviously to reduce the overall impact on the circulation network immediately adjacent. So if you want to go to the next slide, Michael, I can kind of talk about phase two here. So this is really where the interesting conversation that can occur, right? These are these publicly controlled assets, the things that your comments are all, it's extremely valuable and necessary for us to say, what do we want here? Is it a higher density affordable housing? Is it you want more, civic uses? There's, what is the discussion around? And we can talk about this later when we start the community conversation. What do you think should go here? And we think, given the various constraints that are on the area, both from an environmental perspective and timing, you're looking at in a more of a 5 to 10 year time frame for something like this, just given the fact that there's a lot of moving parts. So, and recognizing that the market analysis that RKG, performed, identified a lot of the units that are coming online are going to address that sort of immediate market rate demand, but we're still sitting here with this large demand for affordable housing and wanting to look at mixed income opportunities to help balance how, the impact on the areas in that regard. So what we'll really be looking for tonight is just your feedback on what you think for this site, and feedback in terms of, how the infrastructure could service that in the best way. So I think that's the general. I don't know if Ken, you had anything to add on any of these options.
The only thing I'd add, Brian, is that what's depicted in those two colored buildings on the west side is based on existing zoning. It's about 450 residential units that could be built under existing zoning with ground floor retail and also a small amount of administrative office space for the housing authority. So that's what's shown on those plans that you see on the west side in those two buildings, is about, under existing zoning, is about 450 residential units. So I think now we're going to our last segment of the presentation, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A, is the transportation and mobility aspects, and Joe Bauskas will address that.
Good evening, Joe Bauskas, VHP traffic engineer. I've been working in Norwalk for the last 30 years, and I've been tasked with the transportation mobility section of the TOD study. I want to talk briefly about a few things with this transportation. Number one, involvement connections, and the connections provided by the train station with excellent roadway access between Washington Street and East Norwalk, Dr. Martin Luther King Drive and South Main Street all provide excellent access to Interstate 95, as well as the surrounding neighborhoods with street access. We know MLK Drive and Water Street are major arterials. South Main Street and Washington Street are minor arterials, and a lot of collectors involved in Monroe Street and Hanford Place, which really provide accessibility to the train station. Next. The sidewalk network itself is extensive. It's mostly connected. There are a few areas that are in need of repair. We know there's some obstructions along parts of some of the streets. This is from the previous sidewalk surveys that were done. We know there's some areas where we need to provide additional ADA improvements and some notable gaps under some of the underpasses. So there's some minor work to be done, but overall the network is connected for the train station. Next. In terms of the bicycle network, there are limited on-street bicycle lanes. We know that, and that's a constraint from the urban type of development we have around the train station. We know there's limited bike lanes on Monroe Street, Washington Street, and Water Street. The city is proposing to do bike lanes on MLK Junior Drive with proposed share roads on South Main Street. The intent of the bike network is to connect to the Norwalk River Trail across the river in the future. Next. And in terms of parking, obviously the train station has extensive parking garage, has the parking lot on the east side of the station, as well as Webster lot, as well as many other municipal lots in the area. So we've evaluated those parking lots as part of the previous parking studies that were done. And we're also conducting a shared use parking study for the train station parking lots, as well as Webster lot, to see if there's potential for doing shared parking in the overnight hours. Next. Now, in terms of transportation impacts, we reviewed the recently completed and pending projects in the area of the train station, including the platform that was talked about, the Monroe Street development, and we know about the Spinnaker East Side Station development that has been talked about as well. And we've incorporated all of those into our traffic models that have been developed for the TOD study. Next. We also looked at, as Brian and Ken were talking about, the new development at the train station. We looked at the traffic generation based upon the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual. We look at that development, what does it entail? We were conservatively estimating over 700 residential units with some retail. And we look at the traffic generated from both a vehicle as well as a pedestrian and bicycle and transit ridership. And we distribute that traffic to the network, to the various roadway networks I talked about in terms of MLK Drive, Monroe, and points to east Norwalk, as well as some to the south. And from that, we developed an analysis of the intersection operations in terms of level of service. Now, level of service is basically a characterization of the intersection operation during the peak hours. And what we did here is we graded it from A to F, and with A to B in green, as you see here, and C and D in yellow, which is acceptable, and congested operations being E and F. So we found in terms of the morning peak hour and the afternoon peak hours, not congested operations, but some locations that have levels of sort of C and D at some of the major intersections involved with the TOD study area. Next, afternoon peak hour. So the afternoon peak hour, we're still looking at pretty good level of service at the primary intersection serving the train station. So from there, we then added in all the traffic that's being generated by the pending and planned recently constructed developments, as well as the development around the train station that we have been showing you in terms of the residential units. And that gives us our future level of service at these intersections. You can see we have one cautionary intersection, the Chestnut intersection. Monroe goes to level service D. It's still acceptable. And in the other intersections as well at level service C. So for both the morning and afternoon peak hours, we're not seeing congested operations, but we're also looking at some reduction in level service that's basically accommodating the future traffic being generated. So in summary, what we're looking at in terms of the transportation infrastructure is excellent access to the train station and surrounding neighborhoods. We're looking at supportive infrastructure that's involved. We have the street classifications that can accommodate the traffic. We have moderate peak hour and daily traffic volumes on the roadways themselves. I did mention before about the crash history. We don't have any unusual patterns of crash history at these intersections, which is helpful. And we're looking at intersection operations that don't have any significant impacts. We see some reductions, but basically a level service D operation or better at these intersections. And mitigation, looking at mostly retiming of the traffic signals at the various traffic signalized intersections, some retiming and some revised phasing to better accommodate the traffic volumes being projected from the pending and planned development as well as the future development at the train station. With that, that's my presentation.
Thanks, Joe. I think we have one more slide, and then we'll open it up to additional questions from the community. So that wraps up our presentation. We are, in terms of next steps, looking to continue to obtain valuable community input on the plan. So if there are, we got great comments this evening, any additional comments, thoughts, suggestions, please let us know on the draft plan. We will be working to refine the plan and then bring the plan before the Redevelopment Authority for a plan adoption and moving towards implementing some of the recommendations coming out of the plan itself. So at this point, Alan, I guess I'll turn it back to you. We'll open it back up for additional questions and conversation.
Excellent. Thank you, Ken. Just a reminder to raise your hand or use the Q&A. Just move your cursor down to the lower section of your screen and those commands will pop up in the Zoom tray. And so with that, I'm going to first go to Max and then next Diane. So Max Cisneros, hopefully Max, I'm saying your last name correctly. You should have a command to unmute. And with that, the floor is yours.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Hi, Max Cisneros. And the pronunciation was impeccable, by the way. So thank you. So I used to live in, I used to work at the shelter. And I also do work around immigration needs for folks in the neighborhood. So a huge portion of the neighborhoods surround this area speak Spanish. And I'm sure that they would really like to know a lot of the information that's being interchanged here. So probably in the future, we think about translating these. But my real question is this: how many people who speak Spanish were on the tour of the neighborhood? And how many people who speak Spanish are on the committee that you had mentioned a few times? The neighborhood committee, the committee regarding, neighborhood needs and addressing needs of the neighborhood directly.
Yeah, thanks, Max. And I'm not sure exactly, I mean, we don't have a poll in terms of how many people of the group speak Spanish, but I can say the first meeting we had was fully translated into Spanish as well as Haitian Creole.
I didn't know that.
Live translated, and we actually will make this available. We'll be working to translate this and have it up on our YouTube channel as hopefully as a transcript. So we'll be looking into that for sure, recognizing your point. But yeah, I can't really speak to who specifically on the our community advisory group does speak Spanish, but that's something that we want to increase our engagement with. And if there are specific people that you think we should be reaching out to directly, we would love to have a translated conversation or figure out how we could best obtain their input.
Okay, sounds wonderful. Thank you for letting me know.
Great. Thank you, Max. Let me lower your hand, Max. Next, I'm going to call on Diane Keefe. Diane, you also had a comment in the Q&A at the very tail end of the first session. So when I send a command to open up your mic, you can maybe kind of kill two birds with one stone there. So.
Okay, well, I had a question also about the person who mentioned that there was 450 units in your assumption about the west side new development. How many stories was that assuming that you could get 450 units in there?
Under existing zoning, it's allows 6 stories.
Yeah, well, so that's another point to look at. Why are we limiting zoning to 6 stories when, if you look at some of the high points of recent development, you have Everito's bar is higher than 6 stories and has an amazing view of the sound, and the new Marriott has an amazing view of the sound, and And the old, really huge building that just got renovated at Washington and Maine also has extraordinary views of the sound. So I think we have made a mistake, and that the last 10 years of development has been quite dense, but maybe not going up enough. So that's the number one point. And the number 2 point is that from the person who has been working on this for 30 years, I found that your presentation was really talking about car dependency more than a lot of the people who have moved into South Norwalk. A lot of the young people don't want to be car dependent. A lot of them don't own cars and they just use Uber and Lyft when they need to get around, or they rent cars when they need to get around. And I think that we should have, it would be nice if we had some actual ownership. And I know this is kind of a radical idea, but the idea of reparations to people who have lived in Norwalk for 20 or 30 years and lived in those public housing complexes, that if we could actually, instead of just having the typical affordable housing, which is 80% of the median income in the county, which is not very affordable for many people, it would be good if instead of driving those people out of Norwalk, we actually had some units that could allow them to have ownership with no down payment, where they could actually own. And if they committed to not owning a car for 5 or 10 years, that they could not have carrying costs either. Because I think what we want to do is stop planning around so many cars, because we are all stuck in traffic too much of the time, and there's a better way. I lived in New York City for 20 years and it is a better way. So getting people onto bikes and into walking in the central business district is really a better way to live. And so I hope that this whole development effort could rethink around that.
Thank you. And I appreciate that comment. And I think, so to the first point, it's well heard, right? So the 450 unit concept is definitely not all we looked at. We've looked at looking at density and trying to figure out how many units we could potentially accommodate, maybe with a 9 to 12 story threshold. But it kind of goes back to the original point again. And I know I'm probably sounding a little bit like a broken record in terms of balance. So one of the comments that we've heard from the local residents on the Community Advisory Committee is concerns to not make it look like New York and to be careful in terms of how dense things do get in that area. And it's not saying that this is our ultimate recommendation. What we're really trying to do is introduce this as a conversation. So I really appreciate your comment in that regard. One of the things that looking at increased density, the potential for that on the western side, the site does benefit tremendously from topography. So if you go down MLK, there's a large drop off and a large, grade separation where density may not feel as impactful as it would in other parts of the city. So really what we're looking is comments from you all, just like the one that you just made, that maybe there is an appetite for more density. Maybe that is something that we should be trying to pursue, because again, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity right near the train station. And the more, I think I saw a question, I'm kind of going to jump to one of the questions I saw in the Q&A about, for the 450 units, are 100% of those affordable? Really what we're trying to pursue is sort of a mixed income approach. You don't want to have any concentration of any certain type. And I think it's just from, solid best practices for equity planning. But yeah, the numbers, tend to be more favorable for a more dense development. And we might be able to accommodate more affordable housing in that sort of scenario. But we just want to also be mindful and considerate of, people that are seeing the neighborhood change very drastically over a short period of time, and trying to find out where does that balance lie? And where does that balance lie, not only just in terms of people's preference, but also from a financial perspective, right? So if you say a 5-story stick-built model, you could model at a certain, capacity from a financial perspective. Well, you can't really get any more reasonable gains until you hit that 9 to 12 story. So rather than 8 stories or whatever that is, what is that sort of sweet spot? And I think based on the feedback we received tonight, we're going to pull together some financial models to take a look at that, and to kind of A/B test what may make the most sense to accommodate maybe the most affordable housing or whatever comes out of this meeting. We really truly want to know what people want there so that we could continue and further our analysis in that regard. In terms of the second one, in terms of the auto dependency, and just kind of just addressing that, we want this to be a multimodal project. I think, the City of Norwalk zoning code does recognize the reduction in car dependency that you're sort of referring to. A lot of the zoning has a 1.3 car per, maybe even looking at maybe go down to 1 car per unit, recognizing that, but also, just looking at some of the survey results and some of the feedback we received at the first public meeting and looking at the mode split in terms of who's taking the bus versus who has a car. Again, balance, trying to figure out what that optimal mix is, and to accommodate all users. But I definitely appreciate those comments, and I welcome more. I mean, I'm really interested to know what people's opinions are on density in this area.
And I would add, Brian, that while I talked about 450 units under existing zoning, our traffic analysis that Joe spoke to, he actually modeled as part of the analyzing the impacts. I believe, Joe, it was 650, 700. So
Correct.
We did conservatively look at a higher density and assumed a higher unit count for purposes of the traffic analysis.
Great. Thank you, Brian and Ken, for those follow-on comments. And thank you, Diane, for sharing your point of view. Also, just to share it, the comment in the Q&A that Diane had at the end of the last session, in Diane's opinion, she states that every new building should have solar rooftops. So Diane, I just wanted to make sure I got that into the record for you. And we talked about Kevinese already. So I want to go to a name we haven't heard from yet, and that'd be Kimberly Morton. So Kimberly, I'm going to send a command to you to open up your mic. And when you do, the floor is yours.
How is that? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm Kimberly Morton, and I'm the CEO of the Norwalk Transit District. I wanted to thank you and the staff for really doing a great job and a well thought out plan. I do have several questions. I think Bill kind of answered some of those, but as far as the data for creating the traffic and transportation projections, did you use pre-COVID data, or was that pre-COVID data and then an estimate to compensate for any decreases in density issues, et cetera?
Kim, this is Joe. Great question. We did use pre-pandemic volumes. We used the volumes that were developed as part of the Walk Bridge project. So yes, we did use pre-pandemic level volumes and projected them to the future to account for that. So yes, they are conservative. As we know, things are changing, but yes, they were pre-pandemic.
Yeah, and yes, and we're dealing with a lot of that in Norwalk, really trying to understand where our services are going and what they're going to look like. In the short term, the midterm, and the long term are definitely challenges. I just ask that you don't lose sight of some of the different modes and types of transportation that the industry is using currently, and that is the micro transit type of services and the smaller type vehicles. I do appreciate the comment about the electric vehicles, because I would have made that, but thanks for supporting that comment. Our facility is being designed. We are now moving into some of the final design, and will be equipped and ready for 100% electric vehicles for the long term. So that is a good thing, and it kind of works well into your vision and for this project. So I think it's important that you don't lose sight of the alternative modes, maybe autonomous vehicles, et cetera, which would be a really nice addition. I do have one comment that I wanted to go on the record, and that was the slide pertaining to the 1, 2, and 3 options available as potential options for the intermodal facility. And I think your slide basically says it all, that number 2 is not one that the district could support. And clearly, I think your slide basically said it's not a doable option. It would be a totally disservice to the the general public that utilizes public transportation. It's not customer friendly, and it's most certainly not intermodal in any way
Yes,
or form.
no, it's correct.
So,
We agree.
okay. So with that, I do not have any other comments at the time, other than that we really look forward to working with you. We know there's going to be changes on everybody's part as we look for the long-term vision, and that's not always easy, but we look to be a successful partner with the city and you as well in all of this. So thank you for the opportunity and for including us on all of this.
Great. Thank you for that, Kimberly. All right. Next, we have a text comment from Robert, and then I'll flip it back over to Tanner. So the comment from Robert in the Q&A is, I've been an owner of a commercial and residential rental properties near the train station for about 35 years. Inadequate parking resources have plagued the area for at least the past 20 years. On a per capita basis, there is less dependence on automobile transportation today, but population density has increased so much that South Norwalk is still jammed and things promise to get worse. In listening to the presentation tonight, I didn't hear enough about improving parking resources, and particularly about improvements that also improve recreational and green space. And Robert concludes by saying, I hope I missed something or that there'll be further thinking.
Yeah, and I could take that, Alan, and thanks, Robert, for the question. And yeah, you're spot on, right? I mean, there's a lot of things to consider with all the things that are moving in this area. And I think that, parking is a huge component of that. And it's been a huge component, and I know you're seeing sort of generalized blobs of what we're talking about in development, but a lot of these buildings have been designed with that in mind, to make sure that we're accommodating the parking demand that's obviously generated by these facilities, but also looking for options for long-term commuter parking that, has been historically a long wait list. We've been examining closely the impacts of COVID and trying to determine how best to sort of address that. But we do recognize parking as a critical element of what we're trying to do here. Taking a look at the surface parking lot on the eastern side, is it operating at its maximum capacity? With the new development projects that we're talking about, what can we do to perhaps replace or expand commuter parking in that regard? And then as we have discussions about developments, putting additional requirements for open recreational and green space, not wanting to harden up the landscape too much. So in terms of where we're heading with the overall report, that's definitely a comment that's well heard, and we'll provide additional recommendations in terms of the parking and then recreational and green space.
Great. Thank you, Brian, for the response. Now we'll flip over to Tanner Thompson. So Tanner, you should have the opportunity to unmute your mic or your phone, and when you do, the floor is yours.
Well, how about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yep, we can hear you, Tanner.
Okay. Sorry, I had the wrong mic selected. Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank Diane for articulating what I wish I could have articulated, but she's spot on. And when she's talking about the younger generation who is looking to live without a car, like, I guess I should just say that I am one of those people exactly, and I'm glad that she gave us a name and referred to us. Somebody may in response to a question, maybe to Diane's question, I think, mentioned the last public input meeting, and I was there as well. And I noticed that if I remember right, there were a lot of polls that were done, and we could see the results of the polls come up in real time. And I remember seeing that there was a single person under the age of 30 who attended that meeting, and that was myself. And so I just want to point out that in addition to other groups that are being underrepresented, that one of those groups is young people. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that, one of which being that we're busy, and that finding time to attend one of these meetings is a lot harder when you are early in your career than when you're retired. So I want to make sure that the interests and the lifestyles of young people are taken into account, in particular, exactly as Diane said. We want to be more flexible than being tied to a car. In my case, I do own a car, but I own a couple of bicycles as well, and I've chosen to live in a place where, like I said, I can walk to the train station. In terms of affordability, I wanted to point out there was a point about whether a property is going to be 100% affordable or mixed, and I think the correct answer is mixed. And I just wanted to give an example of that, and that's Barcelona. Actually, Barcelona is actually an incredibly dense city, although they have very little high-rise development. Most development in the city is around 5 or 6 stories, and the city was very well planned. It's famous for being well planned, and one interesting attribute of Barcelona is that the buildings were designed in such a way that typically the lower income, lower class people would live in the same buildings as the upper class people. They would be separated perhaps by stories, but not by block and not by neighborhood, and that encourages a really good mixing of the culture and integrated culture, which I think we can simulate here by not having 100% affordability in a building, but rather to spread the affordability out across the neighborhood, across all the projects in the neighborhood. So I'm glad to hear that. Somebody made a comment about how some people aren't interested in it looking like New York, and I guess I would point out that that New York contains multitudes, and yes, Manhattan has a lot of pointy towers. But I had the opportunity to live in Brooklyn for a little while in a neighborhood that was kind of like what I described in Barcelona, and maybe even less dense, townhomes that only went to maybe 3 or 4 stories. And those communities are still incredibly walkable. They're quite dense. They have lots of housing available. You don't have to own a car because you can walk to the end of your street and there's a bodega and a bus, or in some cases a subway, to take you to the more dense parts. And I think that we, and again, this kind of like my earlier comments, this is directed as much at the city officials as it is at VHB, because this extends much beyond the study area. But if all of South Norwalk could be like that, then I think we could solve the housing affordability problem without having to build buildings that are so tall that some people object to them. Even though personally, I don't have an objection. I'd love to see a 9 to 12 story building right next to the train station, especially because there's a hill there. The hill, I think, helps with the height there. Let's see, I have notes, and I think that was my original thing I wrote down. One of the renderings that was showed the new station place on the east side with like a drop-off pickup roundabout there, and then a new development on the west side with kind of a pedestrian plaza going through the middle of it. I love the idea of the pedestrian plaza, but I want to just suggest that perhaps to switch the east and the west sides in that rendering, just at a very high level, because I understand that's a very high level mock-up that you have there. It's not a plan by any means, but just at a high level, if those two uses could be swapped, especially because MLK is that the automobile arterial on the west side, that putting all of the car focused use cases on the west side next to MLK, not only would that streamline the car traffic, but also putting the pedestrian focused amenities like a plaza on the east side, that kind of centers those uses closer to the parts of town that are most walkable. In particular, I'm envisioning somebody coming to Norwalk for the first time on foot, or on the train, I guess, getting off the train, being on foot, and then having the goal to walk maybe to the aquarium or to the mall or to some other amenity, maybe on Washington Street, and being introduced to the town via this pedestrian plaza that then leads to sidewalks that take them right to the heart of Sono. Seems like something that we have the potential to design and should design at this point. So that's all I've got. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tanner. We appreciate those comments. Okay. Next, we have a comment from Gerald Coles. Gerald comments that you may have already answered this question before I joined the call, but how many years do you anticipate this project taking, and how many years before it commences?
I can speak to that, Alan. I think, obviously we're still using this as a planning process to define what the project actually is, but there are a number of projects that are ongoing or entitled on the eastern side of the train station right now, so I can speak a little bit more definitively to that. So you obviously have the one platform project that's been constructed. You have the 10 Monroe on South Main and Monroe over there, which we would estimate probably in the 3-year time frame to coming online, 2 to 3 years. The 1517 Chestnut probably in a similar 2 to 4 year perhaps time frame. The western side, gets a little trickier just in the fact that there's a lot of moving parts when you talk about the, relocation and remediation of SNU and figuring out where their operations could go, because they still do have a need to accommodate that. And then some of the things with the housing authority in terms of how these deals are structured. So I would say that's more in the, 4 to 7 year time frame, if not 5 to 10 on the western side. But really what it is really using this process that we're all engaged in right now to define what that looks like and then map a way forward. And as soon as we adopt this plan, get moving on trying to get, some of these projects and recommendations implemented.
Great. Thank you for that, Brian. Okay, I see a couple more hands raised and another question in the Q&A. So we'll go to a hand raise. That's Diane Loricella. Diane, you should be able to unmute your mic when you're ready.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for pronouncing. I answer to either of the pronunciations of my last name, so I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Anyway, I wanted to again echo what the other Diane on the call said, of course, when I spoke about renewables. Solar panels, I pray for the day when it is a policy in our zoning regs that it must be opted out instead of opted in. So yes. However, I also wanted, as a member of the Connecticut Green Building Council, I wanted to advance the thought, in addition, is because of climate change, of course, we are seeing increased storms that are very, increased rainwater, intense storms. Maybe not as many storms, but the ones that we have are intense. So I wanted to see if we could make sure this particular project really takes a look at looking at our polluted runoff. I've noted that all of the things that have been proposed introduce more impervious surfaces, which means less chance for water to slowly and more naturally infiltrate into the soil as one of the tools in the toolbox for stormwater management. So I wanted to, and I have been around a long time in Norwalk. I've heard a lot of the intention of utilizing green building design and green infrastructure, but I haven't seen it put into action often enough. And I hope we're turning a corner because of the intense storms and the flooding we've seen in other urban areas. So I wanted to also lift up the idea of living roofs, or and I don't mean having a patio garden on top of a roof, which is all I could even get out of the mall development. I was speaking of living roofs, not having a patio with a few trees. I think we need in this, what I've seen you propose as for partly public entities, but also our private entities, encourage them to have living roof tops, which include succulents that absorb up, way beyond 50% of runoff. Of course, you have to plan for it in advance so that the structure can take it. And lastly, on the outside, periphery of these wonderful developments on both sides of the Sono station, want to make sure that we have increased vest pocket parks that take into effect the heat island effect that happens when you don't have as many trees. We also need to look at seating because people will be waiting for their loved ones, but also just to have a more welcoming streetscape. And I'm sure the intention of with VHB and others, I just wanted to lift that up as an important facet of having a quality neighborhood. So thank you again.
Thank you, Diane, for that. Certainly appreciate it. All right. Next, I'm going to head over to Valerie in the Q&A. And Valerie asks a question: how will all of this impact the Columbus Court community, section 2 of the study? It is an obviously older community, so how would you work with the homeowners to improve the area so that it fits into the more modernized improvements happening around it?
And I can take that, Alan, as well. And thanks for that question. And I know Georgiana just wrote me. We've been working with Georgiana and actively having discussions in terms of that specific property, but also other properties in the area as a way to sort of target our reinvestment efforts. So basically, we all recognize that development is great. Development has a lot of potential, but we want to make sure that it doesn't overly impact existing components of the neighborhood. And the resources that are derived from development are reinvested back into the community, particularly into developments like, Columbus Court and the like, and through our, residential, whether it's through our residential facade improvement program or specific targeted investments such as that property. We are actively, keeping that in our frame of reference as we move forward on all of these to try to balance the neighborhood with the new development while improving the existing housing stock. The redevelopment agency manages a pretty robust residential rehabilitation program where we actually offer grants to homes throughout South Norwalk and throughout the community to actually rehab their facades, or we'll be working to develop programs to help also with some sort of interior improvements. Jessica Vonishek out of the city's Office of Planning and Economic Development, Community Development, actually has structured a great set of programs to rehabilitate these sort of existing housing stock and opportunities there that you'll be hearing more about as we move forward throughout this plan. So there's gonna be a lot of good resources derived through the MLK Corridor Initiative, through this initiative, and other ones throughout the city to sort of reinvest in the community to help balance the impacts of the development that we're talking about tonight.
Great. Thank you, Brian, for that. All right, at the moment that empties our Q&A. We do have one more hand raised, and I'll go to that in just a moment. I just want to remind people once more, if you do have a comment or a question like some of your other peers have tonight, please feel free to use the Q&A or raise hand button, and we'll certainly get a chance to get your voice heard. So with that, I'm going to call on the other Diane Keefe. So Diane, you should now have the opportunity to unmute your mic, and you can share your comment or ask your question.
I just wanted to raise another point, which is about safety and safety on the street level, and how the existing new developments in South Norwalk don't have a lot of street activity at night because they don't have bodegas and they don't generally have restaurants in the bottom of them. So there's not a lot of activity, and women feel safer when there's an active street. So I think it would be great if there was some way to institutionalize that in when you design the building, make some requirement of the types of uses that go on, so that it's not just an office that's going to be open 9 to 5 and then empty at the ground floor of whatever is built. And that would enable, the streets to be safer around the building. And I know also it would be helpful, and this is something we don't see in the South Norwalk train station. There's one, there was room for one little restaurant to have coffee in the morning, and that is often closed. So as a consequence, the South Norwalk station itself isn't safe necessarily. But if there was a business operating there, like pizza 24/7, that would make it a lot safer. So, it's simple things like that that can really make the difference between a welcoming community and a safe community and a not so well planned community. So I hope we can remedy some of these things in the next stuff that's built.
Great. Thank you for that, Diane. Okay, so with that, just scanning the list once more. I don't see any other open questions in the Q&A. I don't see any other any other raised hands. I believe we did have a last call for that a moment ago. So one more hand raised. And with that, it's Tanner Thompson again. So Tanner, when you get a moment, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ellen. And I was actually typing it out when you mentioned that just now, so I figured it would be faster to just speak. Yeah, I think Diane's point about restaurants and shops is a great one. Safety is perhaps the most urgent problem that it addresses, but also it just if we could have more restaurants and shops and other amenities at the train station itself. That would be not only hugely convenient for somebody like me who's commuting in and out of that station every day, but it's a natural hub that people are already coming together at, and additional things to bring people together, I think would be a very efficient use of that space. Particular things that come to mind, in addition to the obvious ones like a bodega or a convenience store, a bank, a post office. Diane mentioned a restaurant or two. Those are all things that I've wished on multiple occasions that were present at the train station. Typically, what that means is if they had been there, that would have saved me a car trip, usually up to Route 1, where all the big box stores are. But if those most frequent, most convenient things were at the train station, we could take car trips off the road. Thanks.
All right. Thank you once again, Tanner. Certainly appreciate those comments. Okay, so with that, just scanning the list once more. Ken, Brian, I don't see any other hands raised or open Q&A. So with that, let's turn it back to you for conclusion and next steps.
All right, great. Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Your feedback is invaluable, and definitely we'll be, going through it all again and looking at our plan and making sure that we're, trying to work with the feedback that we received in the best way that we can toward a final report, which will be coming back to you in the next month or two here for your consideration. If you think of anything else as time goes on or after this meeting, feel free to email me. I will type my email in the chat box here. If Alan, that is an appropriate and an effective way of doing that.
It's great.
And you can just reach out to me directly and we'll help route you to the appropriate person that could answer your question, or just if you have another comment, please feel free to send it. The outreach doesn't stop here. We're going to also have another meeting, as I mentioned, for the final report, and then ultimately moving towards implementation. It's really, hearing a lot of the comments today, it seems like there's a lot of things that are supportive, a lot of things that you want to see sort of integrated into the plan, and we will have to rely on you to help us implement those as we go through other public processes moving forward. So again, just really appreciate your time and attention to this. And I don't know if Ken, is there anything else that you wanted to say in terms of next steps, or are we pretty good to go?
No, I would just say on behalf of the entire VHB RKG team, I think this was a really good discussion. I was just thinking that, as someone who's participated in many public meetings like this, this was one of the most well-behaved and civil discussions that we've had, and I just we really appreciate the comments that we received tonight, and thank you all for your active participation. And Alan, thank you for facilitating, doing a great job on the facilitation of the Q&A.
It's my pleasure.
Brian, if I can just add, I think the people that can see the chat box are only the panelists. If you're trying to get your
I did end up pasting that in for everyone to see right after Brian shared it. So
okay,
now
good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very
Thank
welcome.
you.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Anyone else? All right. With that, I think I can end the recording, Brian, if that's okay with you. And with that, I'll end the meeting. So everyone, thanks for your time and have a great rest of the evening.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.